Welcome, hotshots, to Flashlight by Firepower X. Here you can find the industrial strength tools you need to dominate your personal and professional wellness as a firefighter. My name is Jess. I'm creator of Firepower X, former firefighter, and your host for today's webinar. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our special guest, Mr. Dean Wahl. Dean began his 40-year career in the fire service as a volunteer firefighter up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and retired as captain at West Metro Fire Rescue here in Colorado. And in between, he also worked at ski patrol at Arapahoe Basin for 25 years as a paramedic. And alongside his previous positions as field instructor, hazmat coordinator, and union board member, Dean considers himself a foodie, having been a chef prior to his run in the fire service. So welcome, Dean. Thank you so much for being here with us today on the show.
Well, good morning, Jess. Thanks for having me.
Did I forget
Great.
anything?
It's great to see you again.
It's good to see you too. Did I forget anything important in your bio there?
No, you did very good. A lot of details, but over 40 years, you just can't regurgitate it all. It's good.
It is.
Yep.
Well, so now you're retired. You retired from the fire service. Flesh out for us, like when you retired, how long you've been retired now, and kind of what it's like.
Yeah, so I left West Metro, retired about 4.5 years ago. Did a short stint with some special projects for Monument Fire Department. Was with them about 15 months. Just specking out some fire apparatus, and we did a remodel and built an addition onto one of their existing stations. And I've been kind of following them. They're getting ready to build another new station, and they've merged departments, so they're growing. They're doing great.
Excellent. So you've been retired now for about 4 or 5 years. Is that?
Yeah. So 4.5 years from West Metro. About 3.5 years in total. And, it's retirement's been good. Some days, are just hanging around the house, doing honeydews, worked on a bunch of projects that, were put off for a long time prior to retirement. So now just working at those projects slowly. Things, like cleaning my garage, it's all good. We did a kitchen remodel about 3 years ago, and so I've got cabinets from my old kitchen that just kind of need to be hung up in my garage, but I got to clean it before I can hang them up. So it's all good.
That sounds like all of the stuff at the absolute bottom of your to-do list.
Well, so it is. I'd like to do a little more traveling when we can get away. We've done a couple of trips this summer, and as things are getting better now after COVID, we did have a retirement trip planned to Europe, and then in 2020, COVID kind of got the best of that trip. So just getting things like that rescheduled just takes time.
Yeah. And what do you miss the most of not being at the firehouse regularly now?
Yeah, so really the friendships and the friendships in the firehouse are different than camaraderie of firefighters. What I miss about the friendships and the conversations around the breakfast table, dinner table, are it just organically you have these conversations, and after every 4 day you're checking in, how was your week? What did you guys do? Anything interesting? A lot of times problems will come up. My teenage son did something, and I don't really know how to deal with it. So collectively, as a group, you can group think some maybe some solutions, or at least make the person feel like they're not the only one that's going through it, because we've all had teenage kids and we all go through those issues. One of the things with being retired that I really miss about those coffee table conversations are, guys were always going camping. It's like, oh, so I went to this spot. It was really pretty. So that brings up the conversation about, well, maybe we need to plan a trip. Maybe we need to plan a group trip. Um, the other thing that I really miss in retirement about those conversations is just the ability to have people around. Okay, so a lot of times you're sitting around going like, well, hey, tomorrow after I get off shift, I need a hand moving a couch.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody give me a hand, take 10 minutes. Yeah, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when you're retired, trying to find somebody to help do something simple like that is just so much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go down the list and call people?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Do you call a help desk firm and try to hire somebody to do a 10-minute job?
Mm-hmm.
So those are really the conversations that I miss the most, is just having that friend network to talk about things you want to do, things you have done, things that you need to do.
Mm-hmm. So let's flip that. What do you really enjoy about retirement? What are you savoring? Is it getting a pension without having to show up at 6 a.m. for work or
Yeah, so the getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, after almost 40 years of that early rising, it's nice to just not have the stress of that hanging over your head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, always, 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 every day you wake up with a list. When you're working, you wake up with a list of 15 things that you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can realistically accomplish two, but then you add three.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just always running behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the downside of that is when you're working, um, it really takes away from doing the things with your crews that you'd like to do. So I was an officer for almost 25 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you always have a list of officer things that you need to do, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's another list that you want to do. And it's kind of like being retired and having that honeydew list. There's just certain things that you just never can find time to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, so you enjoy not having that additional list. Is that what I'm understanding?
yeah, so it's just taking that daily pressure off and a
Mm-hmm.
little more time to relax and
Mm-hmm.
give some thought to things. One of the things in retirement, kind of when you're working, you don't think about necessarily your retirement and what you're going to do in retirement and how your finances are going to be in your retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So now that I am retired, I can spend a lot more time doing some research. Um, Again, reaching out. I try to get together with people from the department as often as possible. We're having happy hour later today, so
Nice.
that'll be
Uh-huh.
good. But
Mm-hmm.
we get together and have breakfast and lunch, and different groups meet at different times. So that's nice. But you have to take it upon yourself to be engaged. Um, I guess the one thing, I guess, if I was sad in retirement about anything, is
Mm-hmm.
that all these people that I worked with all these years don't reach out to me. So that gives you kind of a feeling of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
People that you used to see, you know, at least 2 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
some I haven't heard from in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And how do you make sure to keep in touch with those folks? Do you just have kind of a mental list of like, oh yeah, I need to talk to Bob or Joe, or do you have outlets? Like maybe do you still work with the union, or how do you make it a point to continue
sure.
socializing?
Yeah, so I do stay involved with the union. I'm still a dues paying member.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have union meetings, once a month,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'll see a bunch of the fellas there and just kind of check up and see what's going on. We also have a retirees group. Um, there was like 19 people that retired last year.
Mm-hmm.
So getting people to be more engaged is difficult, but we did just have a Christmas party with about 50 people there. So
Oh
that was
wow.
really good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, different kind of text message groups.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we're meeting for happy hour. Hey, we're meeting for breakfast. And it's kind of incumbent upon you to to just be engaged and make sure that you're on the list. The other thing that the department does, and they do a really good job, is when people retire, they do a ring out ceremony in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Their last shift at the station that they retire out of, the honor guard will come out and do a nice flag presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's a good way to stay involved because there's typically 40, 50, 60, up to 100 people that show up at these events.
Mm-hmm.
And you just get to check in and say hi and how you doing and what's been going on and how's the family. And it's harder and harder to keep up with people,
Mm-hmm.
um, just as the department hires new people. West Metro's hired hundreds of people since
Mm-hmm.
I've retired, and
Yeah.
I've only been gone not even 5 years yet.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could go back 5 years ago and talk to yourself before pre-retirement, what considerations would you tell yourself to kind of prepare for besides just, we always talk about money in
Right.
retirement from the fire service. Like that's
Sure.
the part most people focus on. But what advice would you give yourself on how to really be able to transition seamlessly into this stage of your life?
So, I think it's different with me because I do make it a point to stay engaged with the
Mm-hmm.
department.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big part of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I kind of miss that notoriety. Everybody knows me. I don't necessarily know everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And which is way different. So when I started with the department, the whole department, all three shifts,
Mm-hmm.
was 68 members.
Mm-hmm.
So you knew everybody, all three shifts. You typically knew who their wife was, what their kids' names were, especially the people that you worked with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I miss those connections. Probably the important thing to me would be to engage with people and get get your contacts
Mm-hmm.
all set up. So
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, when I was working at the training center, I had everybody's contact information
Mm-hmm.
was, just built into my Outlook, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I retired, it all went away. Those
Yeah.
contacts that were in my phone that were attached to my
Mm-hmm.
Outlook all went away when my West Metro email address went away.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it a little bit more difficult, to stay involved, to stay engaged with people, and just, you know, now you have to call. Hey, Tom, do you know what Joe's number is? How can I get a hold of him? You know, I know,
Uh-huh.
I know he does tree service on the side. I need my trees trimmed, and
Mm-hmm.
and I need to get hold of him.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of preparing for that, I
Mm-hmm.
think would be a real good thing. And planning your finances. You can't wait until the end of your career to start.
It's
You have
true.
to start early, early, early.
Uh-huh. That is true. All right, so let's pivot into pension education. Did you know what pension life would entail? Has it been an easy jump?
So I probably didn't plan as well. I won't say I didn't plan. I started saving early.
Mm-hmm.
What I neglected to do was to educate myself.
Mm-hmm.
So just things like right now, there's a big thing about windfall elimination. Windfall elimination has been an IRS um, dictate since I guess 1983.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about it until
Mm-hmm.
I actually was retired and went windfall elimination. Oh, so the department didn't pay into Social Security for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
but my whole career, I've worked a second job, I've taught school, I de-iced airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm qualified for Social Security, but the
Mm-hmm.
Windfall Elimination Act reduces that severely. So right now, my Social Security is about $12 a month.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. So, and I knew that it wouldn't be much. I didn't know that it was going to be cut that much. So just taking the time to be educated
Mm-hmm.
about your future. When we started, the pension distribution was like an 8% matching.
Hmm.
Well, there are other things aside of pension, as far as RHS accounts for retired health savings,
Hmm.
things that if you don't educate yourself about and know how to get involved with,
Hmm.
you just don't think about.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can, can make a huge, huge difference.
Hmm.
And, now that I know a lot more, my son's 33 years old. That's about the time that I started seriously saving for retirement.
Hmm.
And with him, he won't have necessarily a pension. All of his assets are going to be 401k kind of assets
Yeah.
moving forward. So he gets a match. How to capitalize on that, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Big difference.
Are you already harping on him? Are you-
Yes, yes,
Reminds
all
me
of
of
the
my own father.
yeah, all of the time. A big
Mhm.
thing is, especially in this economy, trying to buy a house.
Mhm.
Um, I bought my house. I was 27.
Mhm.
So he's already past that and really hasn't started saving to buy a house. And then the way that the housing market has increased is just crazy.
Mhm.
I don't know how that counteracts with the wages.
Mhm.
I mean, when I started on the fire department, I think my first year I made $24,000 a year, right?
Mhm.
Well, when I retired, I did a lot better than that. But I
Mhm.
know that my son now is, he's 33 and pretty much making what I did when I retired. So,
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, it's definitely things are a little different than they were
mhm,
generationally.
sure.
And let's talk a little bit about let's kind of transition into mental health because that
Okay.
is kind of the focus of our channel that we
Sure. I
talk
get
about
it.
a lot.
Yep.
Besides, I mean, money is very important in retirement to feel safe. And I know you and I have talked offline about, an emotional support system. So I know when you talk about staying in touch with people, that's kind of what's built into your emotional support system. Um, what other pieces of that do you think are important for firefighters who are still on the line? Just kind of making sure that all their bases are covered.
Sure. Well, just strong family relationships. Relationships they're hard.
Hmm.
You have to work at them, right?
Hmm.
My wife and I have been together over 42 years.
Hmm.
So, our relationship has always grown, but she's always been very independent because, I spent 1/3 of my time working with my crew at the firehouse, right,
Hmm.
for all those years and was not available to
Hmm.
her, when the drains were clogged and the toilet wouldn't flush and the heater got turned off.
Hmm.
So she was very independent and learned how to work through some of those we'll just say issues.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people on the job, their spouses, their significant others, aren't prepared for that, and that has really my experience has been that it's added some relationship problems where you know um, just things like taking the car in for an oil change. We don't think anything of it, but our spouses may not feel comfortable going to a dealership. They always feel like they're getting taken advantage of.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing with the communication is sharing. It's hard. It's easy for us to share with the people that we work with what
Hmm.
we do. It's hard for us to share with the people that we don't work with our families, with our spouses, with our kids,
Hmm.
what we do. um, Story, my wife, once upon a time, was kind of upset with me because she says, I always try to keep you informed of what's going on and what we're doing and how Tyler's doing in school and this, that, and the other thing.
Hmm.
But you never come home and tell me about your day.
Hmm.
So, and I was probably being kind of a smart aleck. For about a week, I came home and started telling her about my day. And after a week, she's like, Okay, that's enough. I don't need to know anymore.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, you have to kind of know your audience and what things you can tell and what things you can't. And the I guess the bad thing about that is the stories that you can't tell, you
Mm-hmm.
have a tendency to keep inside.
Mm-hmm.
And over a 40-year career, that bank can get pretty full.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you come in. That's where
It
Firepower
is.
X
And I'm also
comes
gonna
in.
come in right now because there's like a line of light right in your
Ah, okay.
let's
Yeah.
fix let's if you wanna there we go. I don't want you to have to stare into the light for this whole conversation.
It's all good.
Perfect. Thank you.
How's that?
That's awesome. Yeah, and you've kind of mentioned, earlier that in your career that you really did a good job kind of with your mental hygiene, and you and I have sat and brainstormed. What do you think was the secret to that? Of not really taking on, I mean, I know you've run some bad calls and been through some
Sure.
stuff, but you've told me before that you felt like you didn't carry a lot of that baggage along with you. Would you agree with that? And what was your secret?
So I don't really know that I consciously have a secret. I grew up, my father was in law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of my direction. I also grew up in northern Wisconsin, where you had to be a little bit more, independent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if the closest low level hospital was 30 minutes away, and if you actually were injured, and a lot of farming kind of implement serious injuries, people wrapped around power takeoff units on tractors, and you're maybe 2 hours from a level one hospital, and
Mm-hmm.
we take those things for granted here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that level of growing up with that level of independence,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a little bit more preparation and growing up in law enforcement just helped prepare my mind,
Mm-hmm.
um, for dealing with issues. And I'll tell you, it's way easier to go to work and deal with somebody else's issues
Mm-hmm.
for a 10-minute period of time
Mm-hmm.
and then walk away, and you don't have to carry that with you.
Yeah.
So that's probably the big realization,
Mm-hmm.
is just not, it's okay to, go to a call and have a young child pass away, and you feel sad, and you're sad for the family, and you want to be supportive,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't take that with you. And I've had partners on the ambulance over the years that have had some real issues where they
Mm-hmm.
go to a motorcycle accident, and it's like my brother has that kind of motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you go to car accidents, and I live in the middle of the community that I serve,
Mm-hmm.
so constantly seeing people that I know, people's family members.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people will call you and say, "Hey, what happened to my brother?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't tell you. It's
Yeah.
just trying to avoid those situations. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just being able to deal with their issues. If they were my problem
Mm-hmm.
at my house, it would be a lot more, because it doesn't go away, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's where we get into trouble is that
Yeah,
identity that thin membrane between
yeah,
other people's problems and our problems. And the minute
yeah,
something crosses over, yeah, and then learning, and we can learn to keep that boundary pretty firm,
sure.
or send things across. So,
Yeah.
um,
Another thing that just it's kind of difficult in retirement is, and we've
mhm,
talked about this before too.
mhm,
So the department does as good a job as they can with trying to have resources available,
mhm,
whether it be through EAP, whether it be through just the kitchen table counseling, whether it be through a program like Mayflower, which typically reacts after a particularly stressful incident that you were involved in.
mhm,
when you retire, all those resources the day you retire are gone.
Yeah.
So now you're left on your own. And if you're accustomed to utilizing those services,
Hmm.
um, that's something that's definitely not talked about or planned for in retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know of any, does the union have access to anything for retirees, or what outlets are there that you know of?
Yeah, so again, not for retirees. The
Okay.
IFF has the Center of Excellence. They've got
Yeah.
a location on the East Coast and a location on the West Coast
Yeah.
that are very beneficial.
Hmm.
Um, because I'm still a union member, if I
Hmm.
were to need those resources,
Hmm.
likely I could get involved.
Hmm.
But to what extent, I don't know. I've never really researched it to that detail. But
Yeah.
yeah, things like EAP are gone. So if you plan correctly,
Hmm.
some of those things can be afforded to you through your insurance,
Hmm.
you know, but planning for insurance, especially filling that gap between retirement and Medicare age,
Hmm.
very difficult.
Yeah. Well, and the importance of having good habits, like maybe the time to develop new coping skills is while you're still working,
Oh, for
because
sure.
you have, and then when you get to retirement, you'll have those good habits in place,
Right.
you know. Um, do you think we are doing our firefighters the best service possible right now as the system stands for mental health for them, as most fire departments have their setup? What's your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to say no, and we've discussed this in the past.
Yeah.
I've had friends and family members and crew members that have struggled. And in my 40-year career, I've
Hmm.
had people that have died by suicide, that have contemplated suicide, that have lost jobs because of drug and alcohol addiction.
Mm.
And there are things that can be dealt with. The difficulty with the fire department is they have programs in place, but a lot of times those programs aren't utilized. And what I like to say is once you utilize a program one way or another, you're kind of put on the radar, right?
Hmm.
And once you're on the radar, it's very, very hard to get off.
Hmm.
I think that the departments, and not just West Metro, I think that they put these programs in place because they truly want to help. Um, but I don't know that they necessarily know what the best fit is.
Hmm.
Um, all my years as an officer, whenever there was a problem,
Hmm.
I didn't necessarily look at there's a problem. How can we do the discipline?
Hmm.
I always looked at, okay, so not the problem, but what's causing the problem? What's the strife
Hmm.
that's leading up to the problem?
Hmm.
Once you can identify kind of the strife, whether it be relationship issues, it's usually an issue that leads to the alcoholism, that leads to the disciplinary action, that
Hmm.
leads to potential, separation from the department. So
Hmm. Do you think departments just don't go there to the root because they have so many other things to worry about, or it's just because they haven't really stumbled upon the right solution to approach that yet?
yeah. So it's hard. I know that my wife worked in gas and oil for some time,
Hmm.
and gas and oil and a lot of these construction related jobs
Hmm.
have always done kind of more randomized testing.
Hmm.
And I know when I was with the department, most of the drug and alcohol prevention things
Hmm.
were for cause testing.
Hmm.
Get a lot of pushback. There's a lot of issues to deal with on both sides.
Hmm.
But I think if you look at the potential long-term effects,
Hmm.
um, moving those programs forward is probably a good idea. I
Mm-hmm.
think that there is some benefit to it. Now it's hard. It's just like physicals. It's like, oh, they're putting this in place because they want to get rid of me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, they they maybe like to help you.
Mm-hmm.
I know in the past that because of the physical evaluations, the annual physical evaluations,
Mm-hmm.
so most people do okay. But there have been a number of people whose lives were essentially saved.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe their careers weren't saved, but their lives were saved.
Yeah.
So you just have to weigh the situation.
It is. It is a very slippery slope because that you lose that anonymity, right? When
Mhm.
you start engaging programs like this that are preventative or
Right,
screening, any type of screening or diagnostic, um, that you do catch things, but then
right.
the consequences of catching them, and then, so and how much do you want your department's nose in your business, because
Yes,
it's very vulnerable to
sure.
have your employer know that much about you.
Yep.
And so, yeah, as you said, the radar,
Yeah. Well,
because
and whether you use, EAP or you use your insurance
mm-hmm,
or, you go to a rehab center,
mm-hmm,
um, you get the help you're looking for, but now somebody knows about it.
yeah,
And that makes it difficult. And again, we've talked about this. That's kind of why I like the your format in Firepower X, because it's providing resources that people can access with some anonymity.
mm-hmm,
You're not tied to any department.
yeah.
So I think that makes your resources very valuable.
Thank you. Well, your input helped fashion the decisions I made about that. So it's a
Yeah.
full circle
Well,
gratitude there.
glad to
Uh,
help.
um, and what do you, as far as, so I guess what's your verdict then? Do you think it should be a third party service, or do you think the departments, the kind of a lot of the changes that are happening in fire departments right now, there's a lot of reorganization happening. And I think
Sure.
some departments are trying to pick up this weight and carry it for people, and it's very trial and error. Let's admit,
Right.
ultimately, whose responsibility is it? Like, you know, who really needs to step up here, I guess, and what's the best path? You kind of pointed to me, but can we do better as a fire service on the whole, to support each other?
So So, and again, I think it's because of my affiliation with the IAFF, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that the union having these resources
Mm-hmm.
is a very positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of separate from the department, even though there's association there.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody does something through the union, the department doesn't necessarily know about it.
Yeah.
Now, the department does a real good job of like family medical leave and being able to take the time, but then it's on the schedule, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows that so and so is off and he's been gone for a month, and I know his wife wasn't pregnant, so why was he gone? you know
Yeah.
those are things that, because it's such a tight knit community, it's kind of hard to deal with, because now you're dealing with the problem, but then you're dealing with everybody's perception of the problem as well.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
so resources that are available, I think that if they could develop more resources kind of offline,
Mm-hmm.
would be beneficial.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's okay. We're just we're just knocking around our brains here together. How does peer support factor into that? Do you think peer support is beneficial? Or is it in that muddy water of knowing too much about your coworkers?
So good and bad. It depends on how they approach peer support. So I
Mm-hmm.
think peer support can be used very effectively when
Mm-hmm.
it's used in kind of in an educational way to let you know about resources that are available or to identify
Mm-hmm.
trends and issues in the fire service.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Peer support can be a little bit more difficult if it's formalized.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, feeling like, well, the department is prying in my business and maybe they shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that, and I don't even know if Mayflower exists anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But years ago, there was a Mayflower program where people would come in from other departments, which
Mm-hmm.
helped with kind of the anonymity issue.
Mm-hmm.
Still talking with people that are in the fire service and understand where you're coming from,
Yeah.
but you're not going to see them on the next call,
Yeah.
right? And they're not your boss. So I think that that's an approach too that can be effective. Um, yeah, but how do the interagencies cooperate to get that program set in place?
Mm-hmm. And how, as an officer, you're 25 years as an officer, what did you see your role in kind of the more informal peer support with your crew? Of how did you
Hmm.
know when to say something to someone like, "Are you okay?" Or did you kind of keep your nose out of it, or what was your approach during that time?
So just mostly one-on-one conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely not trying to call any kind of issues out with the rest of your crew,
Yeah.
but making a point to working out with an individual. So you're kind of off on the side,
Mm-hmm.
or after training, just talking about, hey, well, so what did you think of that concept? Or, what
Mm-hmm.
did you think of that discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just feeling for people's attitudes towards, drugs and alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
or even things as um, complicated as domestic issues,
Mm-hmm.
calls that you go on.
Mm-hmm.
You see something happen on a call, and maybe when you get back to the station, just kind of elaborate on that call a little bit and get your crew or that individual's feelings and
Mm-hmm.
start a conversation
Mm-hmm.
and let them know that you're open to a conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's a big thing. That's a big thing, is just being open. One thing that I didn't create the saying,
Mm-hmm.
but I really love it,
Mm-hmm.
is that people don't care how much you know till they
Mm-hmm.
know how much you care.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that before too. You have to
Mm-hmm.
be there with your people that you work with,
Yeah.
and so that they know that you're supportive and that you're a resource.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that approach. I kind of let them come to you.
Sure.
I'm here, but you
Yep.
come to me. If you want to, break this down together.
Right.
Um,
And if there's stuff that can be addressed without going through any kind of formal route,
mhm,
that's definitely a positive first step. I know a lot of officer training, they talk about keeping journals and keeping files on people. And
mhm.
I've never been a big participant in that. That doesn't build relationships.
That's kind of a cover your ass strategy for the officer? Is that kind of
Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah, because that is really that relationship, that primary, when you've just gotten off the call and it's just you and your team, the people you work most closely with, that's when that little ounce of prevention of just talking about it will often nip it in the bud before it turns into 10 years later. I've got severe PTSD about this,
Sure.
you
Sure.
know? So, you know, that may be the, the actual belly button of this whole issue is
Yeah.
that dynamic. You're the people you work with every day, and acknowledging and dealing with it right then when it's small.
Right.
So I
Well,
think
and,
we,
and the tells are small too. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is the third Monday that you've either called in sick
Mm-hmm.
or this is the third time in the last month that you've been late.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And letting them opening the door and letting them kind of come to you and give you information that they want to, I
Mm-hmm.
think reaps more benefits
Mm-hmm.
than, sitting people down and kind of hard casing them about and prying into their personal lives.
Yeah.
Just open the door, let them know you're there,
Yeah.
and let them come.
Yeah, and then the trust that's already been established, because, I think the best gift we can give someone in those moments is helping them change their perspective
Sure.
on what's going on.
Hmm.
And the trust you already have with your lieutenant or, your buddy or whoever you're closest to in that smaller group,
Right.
we have better leverage because the
Yep.
relationship's already established, as opposed to going to a going through the whole EAP thing, going to a
Oh,
counselor doesn't know you, and you don't want you don't feel comfortable with them, you don't really trust them yet. um, Much
right.
harder to do through that
Yep.
route. So
Sure.
um yeah, so let's talk about the radar a little bit. And were you, Dean, a rule breaker or a rule follower when you were in the fire service?
So kind of a little bit of both, right?
Uh-huh.
You follow the rules when you have to,
Mm-hmm.
but I sometimes you just have to go kind of off book and
Mm-hmm.
do what's right for the situation, what's right for your crew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One story that we've shared is just being on the radar. So once upon a time, I had a crew member whose brother was a locksmith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he came to me and said, "Hey, my brother's got this tool that he uses all of the time, and he bought a new one because this one's getting kind of worn out. Can we give it a try?"
Mm-hmm.
We had a very elaborate um, car lock door setup that required a book and some knowledge and skills to use it, right? Made it kind of difficult when the weather was bad or when it was dark at night.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing was called a Big Easy, right? It's
Uh-huh.
just a big long metal stick that you could bend,
Uh-huh.
um, and it popped doors like nobody's business.
Uh-huh.
Well, we got the used one, put it on our truck, and we were using it, and everything was great. And then the word got out that we had it and we were using it.
Mm-hmm.
And I got in trouble because it wasn't something that was, approved by the apparatus committee,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't an approved piece of equipment. And how
Mm-hmm.
dare you put something, I didn't spend any department money on it.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, now every rig in West Metro's got that piece of equipment on it. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just have to identify. It all depends on what you're willing to do. You can't go too far off book,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes your crews identify things, um, even locally.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's a big push for everything to be uniform, and
Mm-hmm.
I understand the reasoning for it because
Mm-hmm.
the crews are moving from station to station and from rig to rig.
Mm-hmm.
Things need to be standardized,
Yeah.
but sometimes a specific station is going to have a specific need that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
the officers and the crew members that work in that area are going to have the best kind of ideas and results and
Mm-hmm.
um, ways to work with the local community there
Mm-hmm.
about a special building or a special need.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Exactly. And yeah, they're best positioned to see the good solutions like you did with the Big Easy. I love that
yeah.
story.
Yeah. Well, and so it kind of put me on the radar, and I got reprimanded, and
Uh-huh.
it's all good. Um, in the end, it all worked out okay.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's the best way for change to start in the fire service? Or do you think it needs to go through all the proper channels and like, because, we go to these conferences and there's so much talk about leadership and innovation, and ultimately, people are very afraid to make changes,
Sure.
especially systemic changes.
Yeah.
So where does change really start, do you think?
So change is hard. I think the big thing is um, people need to be taught more about change. Um, a lot of times it's not what the change is, it's who's bringing it and
Mm,
what is the implementation.
mm-hmm. Okay.
So typically what I found is that small implementation and progression over time is
Mm-hmm.
better than, okay, starting January 1st, we're going to do X, X, and X.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's, a doctrine that if you don't follow, you're going to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about the approach.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all know um, that that things change, but you go to a conference and you're just hyped up on a certain. The change may be good.
Mm-hmm.
What's not considered is the impact, the lack
Mm-hmm.
of equipment, the resources to make the change. Years and years ago, the New York Fire Department, this is just a quick story,
Mm-hmm.
um, was going to go from three-quarter boots to wearing bunker gear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great idea. The impact was something in the order of $25 million
Mm-hmm.
to make that one change
Wow.
because of the department was so large.
Mm-hmm.
So have they done it? Sure, they've done it. They've done it over time. It's a
Mm-hmm.
it's a safety factor, so the change was good, but getting there was difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And um no, it's holistic. You gotta take a more holistic approach rather than
Sure.
trying to get
Yeah.
people on board with
Well, and
changes.
yeah, and typically, a lot of times the people that are offering the change don't understand the impact of it. So it's a little bit of instead of just saying no, we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to do that. Educate them to why, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes no doesn't mean necessarily no. It
Mm-hmm.
just means not now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
again, implementation.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where we want to get to. Let's make a plan on how to go about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes committees are the way to do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Are you seeing any changes in the fire service since you've left that are you're optimistic about?
well, just I think the age and the fitness uh, and the educational levels of the people that are being hired.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I started back in '86, most people that were on the department were coming out of the military. I was not one of them,
Mm-hmm.
um, but good and bad. They had shared stories. They had shared learned experiences
Mm-hmm.
that kind of kept them together as a group.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes made it harder to break into that group because you weren't just part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now I see less people coming out of the military.
Mm-hmm.
It's good and bad. I think they're higher educated,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that they lack some practical skills. So now all these practical skills, need to be taught. Where 40 years ago, everybody was either out of the military or out of the construction trades,
Mm-hmm.
and they knew about building construction and
Yeah.
how things worked. And you got to know how a building's put together to know how it's going to react when it's on fire,
That is very
or
true.
when the wall's been caved in by a car. There's the whole litany of issues there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the safety that comes with having that
Oh yeah.
knowledge of like,
Mhm.
even, if you fall through a floor, like knowing basic building construction and where your points of egress are, is
Absolutely.
going to get your butt out, you know.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything else we haven't touched on that's important to you about all these topics we've covered that you kind of want to share with our viewers as we start to wrap things up?
Um, Retired life. Think about it early, make a plan. So we were fortunate to be part of the Fire and Police Pension Association here in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And FPPA has dealt for years with Fidelity as their investment firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like Fidelity, and even though I have a pension through FPPA, I have assets that are being managed by Fidelity,
Mm-hmm.
and they've done a really good job for me. Now, um, part of the education piece in that is so Fidelity has, and you can be a member, but you can just log on to fidelity.com, even if you're not a member, and get access to, they call it insights. So I get an email about once a week
Mm-hmm.
that's got 5 topics, and sometimes it'll just present as a written format. Sometimes it'll be a little YouTube video clip
Mm, nice.
talking about retire health savings accounts,
Mm-hmm.
talking about investing, talking about Roth conversions,
Mm-hmm.
things that I never knew about, never heard about, even the language while I was working.
Yeah.
Um, and a big thing like right now, so in a couple months, I'm turning 65.
Mm-hmm.
That whole transition piece between leaving the department and that kind of 5 to 10 year gap
Mm-hmm.
where you're on your own for health insurance for you and your family and how expensive it is.
Mm-hmm.
First year I was retired was $25,000.
Wow.
That's a big chunk of retirement.
Yeah, it
So
is.
those are things that you need to plan on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's hard to know what you don't know.
Yes.
So you have to make an effort to
Uh-huh.
learn about the things you don't know.
Yes, and it sounds like Fidelity Insights, their newsletter, is a great way to just get digestible chunks of that
Sure.
information.
And it brings up questions and you're like, oh, well, I didn't know that. So then you'll look into those things further. And again, just it's all about educating yourself. And I wish I would have known about some of those resources,
Hmm.
years and years before retirement.
Hmm.
So
Hindsight, it's always it's always so much better, right? We know what
yeah.
we should have done.
Oh, for sure.
Well, thank you
Oh,
so
for
much,
sure.
Dean. Any closing thoughts today for us to kind of put the cherry on top?
You know, just be open to change, be open to new things, be open to education and
Mhm.
ideas. Um, be open to Firepower X as a
Oh,
resource. Um, and that's really it. Do your best to stay connected, be nice to people, treat them
mhm,
treat them the way you want to be treated,
mhm.
and you'll do just fine.
Thank you. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our viewers. If you're still with us, you're amazing. We appreciate you. And as always, my door is always open to you. If you have any thoughts, questions, feedback for me, you can email me at info@firepowerx.com. And I will put a link to Fidelity's Insight newsletter sign up in the show notes if you want to check that out and get a nice drip of financial information as you move toward retirement. And thanks again, Dean, for coming on the show. And we will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Thanks for having me.